18 years of building a life together, or so I thought. Turns out, she was just climbing a ladder, and I was one of the rungs she stepped over. It all went down at the company's winter fundraiser gala. You know the type. Rented ballroom, trying way too hard to look upscale, champagne that costs more than it should, people in expensive suits pretending they care about charity while really just networking. Rebecca had been obsessing over this event for weeks. Her new supervisor, Tyler, was going to be there, and she kept going on about how critical he was for her career advancement, how he was going to revolutionize the entire corporate structure, how being seen with him would elevate her position. We arrived at the venue around 7:30. The place was decorated like someone watched too many luxury hotel commercials. Lots of fake crystal chandeliers and excessive gold trim everywhere. Rebecca looked stunning in her navy blue dress, I'll give her that. But the second we walked through those doors, something changed in her demeanor. She got this practiced smile, the one she reserves for performances, for when she's working an audience rather than being genuine. We'd been there maybe 10 minutes when it happened. She leaned in close to me, close enough that I could feel her breath on my ear, but there was no warmth in it. "Listen carefully," she whispered. "Don't embarrass me tonight. Tyler is really important. Do you understand?" Before I could even process what she was saying, she started brushing at my jacket lapel like she was removing dust from a museum piece. Her fingers were stiff, completely detached. This wasn't affection or even concern. This was her treating me like a prop that needed adjustment. Then she glanced toward a side corridor near the bar, the kind of hallway where catering staff and maintenance workers come and go like ghosts, invisible to the people who matter. "Maybe you'd be more comfortable back there," she said, not quite looking at me. "The main floor is getting pretty crowded, and I need to focus on making the right impressions tonight." I'm not going to pretend that didn't hurt. After 18 years being dismissed like hired help at an event for a company I helped build, yeah, it hurt. But I've learned that sometimes the most powerful response is silence. So I just nodded once. That was all she got from me. I turned and walked toward that service hallway without argument, without protest, without giving her the scene she probably expected. Found a spot near some stacked catering trays and loosened my tie, leaning against the wall. A young waiter spotted me and looked concerned, probably wondering if I was supposed to be back there. I gave him a slight smile and waved him off. No problem here. I was used to being in the shadows. Rebecca had been pushing me there for years. Tonight, she just made it official. From my position behind the scenes, I had a perfect view of the main ballroom. I watched Rebecca glide back into the spotlight, radiant and confident, her arm looped through Tyler's elbow. He looked exactly like you'd expect. Mid-30s guy in an expensive suit. The kind who probably has his entire persona built around quarterly earnings reports and disrupting traditional business models. Rebecca was introducing him to people, and I could hear fragments of her pitch. "Tyler is a true visionary," she told someone near the podium. "He's completely restructuring our approach to market positioning." I had to resist laughing at that. Restructuring, sure. At one point, maybe 20 minutes into my exile, someone in the crowd asked Rebecca about me. I heard the question clearly. "Isn't that your husband over there?" The person seemed confused about why I was standing alone in the service area. Rebecca didn't miss a beat. "Oh, him?" She laughed, light and dismissive. "That's just someone who used to do some consulting work here years ago. Ancient history, really. I'm actually surprised they let him attend." The group around her laughed politely. Tyler looked mildly uncomfortable for a second, but he didn't say anything to correct her. Just someone who used to do consulting work. Ancient history. Like I was a contractor she barely remembered. Not her husband of nearly 2 decades. Not the man who'd spent years building the infrastructure she was currently exploiting for her career advancement. What Rebecca didn't know, what none of them standing in that ballroom knew, was that I wasn't just ancient history. 15 years ago, I was one of 3 people who founded the parent holding company that owned this entire operation. We'd started small, built it up through careful planning and strategic partnerships, and eventually it grew into the multi-division corporation it is today. About 7 years ago, I decided to step back from daily operations. I wanted to focus on other interests, spend more time on personal projects, be present for what I thought was my marriage. I believed Rebecca and I were partners building a life together. Turns out, she just saw my stepping back as her opportunity to step up, and she wasn't interested in sharing credit for anything. But here's the critical detail that Rebecca never understood. Stepping back from daily operations is not the same thing as walking away entirely. When I transitioned out of my active role, I kept certain protections in place. Legal safeguards embedded deep in the corporate structure, the kind of provisions most people never bother to read because they're buried in hundreds of pages of incorporation documents and bylaws. My attorney back then, this gray-haired cynic named Richard, who'd spent 40 years watching corporate backstabbing, had been adamant about these protections. People have short memories, he'd told me, over expensive scotch in his office. They'll forget who built the foundation the moment you're not in the room. Put your protections in writing, make them ironclad, and hide them in the fine print where ambitious people won't look. I'd taken his advice. One of those protections was buried in Section 7, subsection D of the corporate bylaws. We'd started calling it Provision 7D, though at the time it felt almost paranoid to include it. The provision stated that any founding member who was publicly humiliated, excluded, or denigrated by a current company representative during an official corporate event could trigger an immediate ethics review and board oversight. It was designed specifically to protect the people who'd built the company from being erased by newcomers who didn't respect or understand the foundation they were standing on. I'd honestly never thought I'd need to use it. It felt like insurance you hope never to claim. But standing there in that service hallway, watching my wife of 18 years literally delete me from her professional narrative while using connections I'd helped her build, something shifted in my perspective. This wasn't just about tonight. This was the culmination of years of dismissal, years of her treating my contributions like embarrassments, years of her acting like she'd achieved everything on her own. I stayed back there for maybe another 30 minutes, just watching. Rebecca gave a short speech at one point, thanking the new leadership team for refreshing the culture and modernizing outdated traditions. The irony was thick. Those traditions she was so eager to modernize, I'd helped create them. The culture she wanted to refresh, built on principles I'd established. But she talked about it all, like it was a burden she was heroically overcoming. I left the gala around 9, slipped out through that same service exit she'd directed me to. The valet fumbled with my keys when I handed him the ticket. He kept glancing at me, then at his phone, looking increasingly nervous. "Sir," he finally said, almost whispering, "I didn't realize you were here. I didn't know." He trailed off, handed me the keys with both hands like he was returning something valuable. I didn't ask what he meant. I just nodded and drove home. When I got to my house, I went straight to my office. Bottom drawer of my desk, behind a bunch of outdated quarterly reports and some retirement gift catalogs, I pulled out a thick folder. The tab was labeled in black marker, Gala Provisions. The folder was full of legal documents, yellowed with age, each one initialed and time-stamped and absurdly specific. Here's a detail people might find interesting. These provisions had started as a joke. Years ago, when Rebecca and I were still genuinely close, we used to invent ridiculous fake clauses to make boring corporate meetings more entertaining. Stuff like no seafood-based appetizers at donor events, or no speeches longer than 6 minutes, unless the speaker has lost a limb in combat or hostile takeover. Stupid stuff that made us laugh. But somewhere along the way, I'd stopped joking and started actually filing some of these provisions. Because real power isn't loud, it's boring. It hides in footnotes and subsections that nobody reads. And Provision 7D, the one about protecting founders from public humiliation, that one was very real. I found the specific page I needed. The language was precise. If any beneficiary or public representative of the firm initiates reputational damage, exclusion, or denigration of any protected founder or legacy member during a corporate-sponsored event, said action shall trigger immediate board review under the Discretionary Stability Protocol. Below that was a list of protected names. Mine was there. So was Rebecca's, from years ago when she'd briefly served on an advisory board during the early expansion. I pulled out my phone and scrolled through my contacts until I found the one I needed. Chairman William Hayes, Parent Holding Group. The number hadn't changed since the merger in 2016. Neither had the relationship. William and I went back to the very beginning. He'd been our first major investor, and over the years we'd developed a friendship built on mutual respect and shared vision. I opened a new message and typed carefully, knowing each word mattered. Per Provision 7D, I am formally invoking the Discretionary Stability Protocol. Reputational breach confirmed at tonight's corporate event. Media documentation available upon request. I attached a photograph that someone had already posted to social media from the gala. In it, Rebecca was clearly visible, her hand on my chest, gesturing toward the exit. I was in the background, half-shadowed, looking somewhere between confused and compliant. I hit send at 11:47 p.m. The response came back at 11:50, just 3 minutes later. Received and acknowledged. Board review commences Monday 9 a.m. Your legacy position status remains valid. Full protections apply. No legalese, no lengthy explanation. Just confirmation that the machinery I'd put in place years ago was now activated. Rebecca started calling around midnight. The first call, I let go to voicemail. Her voice was defensive, almost casual. Hey, I know that probably came out wrong tonight. It was just optics, you know? Tyler needed to see me as independent, as my own person. You understand how these things work. There was a forced laugh. I didn't mean to hurt your feelings or anything. Second call. 20 minutes later. Her tone had shifted slightly. Listen, I'm serious now. I don't know what you think you're doing, but if this is about some old provision in the corporate documents, come on. That stuff was symbolic. You wouldn't actually make this into something official, would you? She paused, and I could hear uncertainty creeping into her voice. We can talk about this like adults. I didn't answer any of the calls. There was nothing to say. For 18 years, I'd been talking, explaining, supporting, compromising. I was done negotiating. Instead, I turned to my computer and drafted a formal notice. I sent it to Chairman Hayes with full documentation. The email included the time-stamped photo from the gala, an audio clip from a microphone near the refreshments table that had caught Rebecca's comment about me being ancient history, a copy of the gala contract agreement that Rebecca had signed 3 months prior under her role as brand representative, and a highlighted copy of Provision 7D, with both our signatures clearly visible. The reply came back faster than I expected, even for a late-night message. Received and acknowledged. Full board review begins Monday morning. Oversight committee has been notified. Your legacy protections remain intact and active. Rebecca called 4 more times that night. The messages got progressively more worried. By the 6th voicemail, her voice was quiet, measured, almost pleading. Okay, I get it. You're angry. But this isn't just about us anymore. There are other people's reputations involved, careers at stake. Her voice dropped lower, including mine. I silenced my phone after that and left it face down on my desk. Whatever happened next wasn't about emotion anymore. This was about enforcement, about boundaries that should never have needed defending in the first place. Monday morning, Rebecca showed up to work at her usual time, 8:45. She was dressed perfectly, carrying her expensive leather briefcase and a coffee from that place she liked. She walked up to the security gate and scanned her badge like she'd done hundreds of times before. The light turned red, access denied. She tried again, slower this time, making sure the badge was properly aligned. Still red. The gate didn't open. The scanner made a harsh beeping sound that seemed louder than normal in the quiet lobby. She looked over at the reception desk, raising her hand slightly to get attention. The receptionist, a woman named Maria, who Rebecca had probably never bothered to acknowledge in all the years she'd worked there, suddenly became very focused on her computer screen. No response, no eye contact. Excuse me, Rebecca called out, her voice taking on an edge. There's something wrong with my badge. I need to get upstairs. Maria kept typing for another long moment, then reached under her desk and pressed something. Not an alarm, but a silent notification that went directly to building management. Rebecca stood there for 3 full minutes. I know because security footage was later included in the formal review documents. She checked her phone repeatedly, growing more agitated. No messages from HR, no emails, nothing explaining what was happening. Then an elevator opened and a facilities manager stepped out. His name was Kevin, and he was carrying a cardboard box. He walked straight to Rebecca without hesitation. Hey, sorry about this, he said, his tone flat and professional. Your office is being reassigned. You can collect your personal items now. He held out the box. Rebecca didn't take it immediately. She just stared at him. I'm the director of strategic development, she said, her voice rising. Why would my office be reassigned? This is obviously some kind of mistake. Kevin didn't flinch. He'd clearly been briefed on how to handle this. There's no mistake. New policy went into effect over the weekend, after the situation at the gala. He tilted the box slightly so she could see inside. There was a paper taped to the bottom. A printout of that same photo from the event, showing Rebecca dismissing me. Beneath it was an official memo. Internal use only. Reputational trigger under Provision 7D confirmed. Immediate review initiated. Protective measures for legacy shareholder engaged. Assigned contact. Director of Compliance, Paul Mitchell. Rebecca's face went pale. Not dramatically, not like in movies. Just a gradual draining of color as the reality settled in. She took the box with both hands, held it against her chest like it might protect her from what was happening. Kevin gestured toward a small seating area near the lobby wall. "You can wait there. Someone from the ethics committee will be down to speak with you." She walked to the seating area in heels that suddenly sounded too loud against the marble floor. Each step echoed. She sat down and placed the box on her lap. Inside were the standard items from her office. A framed photo, a small plant, some pens she probably never used, her personalized notepad with her title embossed on it. Someone had also included her office nameplate, the one that had been mounted outside her door. Rebecca Sullivan, Director of Strategic Development. It had been unscrewed and placed in the box like evidence. She sat there for 40 minutes. People walked past, colleagues she'd worked with, some she'd managed. Not one of them stopped to ask if she was okay. A few glanced at her and then quickly looked away. Word travels fast in corporate environments, and by Monday morning, everyone knew something serious had happened. That evening, Rebecca got a call from Jennifer, a woman in accounting who'd been with the company almost as long as I had. Jennifer was calling from her personal phone, not the office line. That detail mattered. "Do you know what you've done?" Jennifer asked. Her tone wasn't angry, just matter-of-fact. Almost sad. "What are you talking about?" Rebecca's voice was shaky. "I was in a closed-door finance review this afternoon. We were pulling records from the holding company for next quarter's audit. There's a list of silent investors and controlling interest thresholds." Jennifer paused. "Your husband, your ex-husband, whatever he is now, he's still listed as a majority silent stakeholder. Do you understand what that means?" Rebecca didn't respond. "It means he has veto authority," Jennifer continued. "No expiration date. That designation stays active unless he sells his stake or dies. And here's the part you really need to understand. There's a provision in his original filing, power of veto over major personnel decisions that affect company reputation. You didn't just embarrass some retired consultant at a party. You publicly humiliated someone with legal authority over executive positions." "Nobody told me," Rebecca whispered. "Nobody thought they needed to," Jennifer said. "He's been quiet for years. People assumed he'd gone fully inactive, but assumptions don't change legal documents. You kicked him out of a company event in front of donors he personally brought to the organization, in front of board members who remember when he ran everything. You did it while your arm was linked with Tyler, making it look like you were performing some kind of power move. And you got caught on camera doing it." There was silence on the line. Then Jennifer added, quieter now, "I warned you before about him. He doesn't fight loud. He fights long. The kind of long you don't see coming until the foundation beneath you isn't yours anymore." The call ended. Rebecca sat alone in her apartment, opened her laptop, and searched the internal corporate database. She typed in my name. Nothing came up in the standard employee directory. Then she searched the holding company registry, 3 levels deep in the corporate structure. There it was. David Sullivan, legacy stakeholder, advisory role, Class B silent authority. Next to it, a status indicator in green. Active. She clicked through to the corporate bylaws, found Section 7, subsection D. The language was clear. Stakeholder reputational protections, trigger-based oversight protocol. Named Legacy Advisory Board Chair, David Sullivan. Term indefinite. She'd spent years thinking she knew everything about the company structure. She'd climbed the ladder, networked aggressively, positioned herself as a rising star. But she'd never bothered to look at the foundation. Never checked who still had their hands on the levers of actual power. The formal hearing notice arrived Tuesday morning. Hand-delivered by courier, a man in a dark suit with an ID badge from the holding group. The envelope had a security seal and an official header. Office of Internal Affairs, Corporate Ethics Division. Inside was a single page. Notice of Mandatory Review, Ethics and Oversight Committee. Conduct during winter fundraiser. Provision 7D. Protocol. Invocation. Date of appearance, Thursday, 10:30 a.m. Location, 14th floor, conference room C. The letter continued, "You are hereby required to appear before the Ethics and Oversight Committee to respond to allegations of reputational damage triggered under Provision 7D of the Founders Preservation Statutes. This action is non-negotiable. Failure to appear will result in assumed guilt and administrative penalties as defined in Articles 4, 5, and 9 of the Behavioral Safeguard Protocols." At the bottom, signed Director of Compliance, Paul Mitchell. Paul Mitchell. That name hit Rebecca hard. Paul was someone who'd sat in our living room years ago, someone I'd mentored when he was just starting his career. I'd taught him corporate law, helped him understand how to navigate complex organizational structures. Now he was the one enforcing the provisions I'd written. Thursday morning, Rebecca arrived at the 14th floor 15 minutes early. The hallway leading to conference room C was deliberately plain. No artwork, no company branding, just beige walls and fluorescent lighting. But at the end of the hallway, just before the conference room doors, there was something she hadn't noticed before: a steel plaque mounted on the wall. Polished, clean, with names etched in serif font. Founders, patrons, strategic partners, legacy titles. Rebecca's eyes scanned the list. She recognized some names, retired executives she'd heard stories about, and then she saw it. David Sullivan, Director Emeritus, Founding Partner. Not former, not retired. Just Director Emeritus with no end date. The title was still active, still official, still carrying weight. Her name wasn't on that wall. It had never been on that wall. She'd thought she was building her own legacy, but she'd just been operating inside a structure someone else had built, with rules someone else had written, with protections someone else had embedded years before she'd even joined the company. The conference room doors opened. 2 assistants gestured for her to enter. The room was cold, deliberately so. 12 seats around a long table, 11 of them filled. At the head of the table sat Chairman William Hayes, the man Rebecca had quoted in press releases, the man she'd called a beacon of steady leadership. He didn't ask how she was, didn't offer water or small talk. He just said, "Let's begin." Rebecca sat at the far end of the table, tried to maintain composure. Chairman Hayes opened a folder in front of him. "Ms. Sullivan," he said, using her maiden name, not the married name she'd kept for professional reasons. "Before we proceed with formal documentation, I need to establish context on record. Please confirm that you knowingly dismissed a founding director of this institution at a public, recorded company event." The room was completely silent. Not a cough, not a pen click, nothing. Rebecca's lips moved, but no sound came out at first. Then quietly, "I didn't know he still held that title." Chairman Hayes raised an eyebrow. "Legacy titles are not revocable by perception or assumption. They are protected under Articles 3, 5, and 12 of the Founders' Charter. Your actions, which were recorded, verified, and widely circulated, constitute direct reputational damage under Provision 7D. He leaned forward slightly. "So I'll ask again. Please confirm for the record that you knowingly dismissed Director Emeritus Sullivan at a public company event." Rebecca looked down at her hands. Her fingers were clasped tight, knuckles white. "Yes." Chairman Hayes made a note, signed something at the bottom of a page. Confirmation noted. That was it. No gavel. No dramatic pronouncement. Just documentation. A woman from legal slid a folder across the table. Inside was a separation agreement. The kind they give you when your only remaining choice is whether to leave quietly or create a spectacle that will destroy whatever professional reputation you have left. But the real devastation came after the hearing. Rebecca stepped out of the conference room, tried to gather herself, and nearly collided with Tyler. Her supervisor, her mentor, the man whose rising career she'd tried to attach herself to. Tyler looked terrible. His eyes were bloodshot, his usually perfect hair disheveled. He grabbed her arm, not gently. "Do you have any idea who he is to me?" His voice was shaking. Rebecca blinked, confused. What are you talking about? Your husband, Tyler hissed. The man you sent out the service exit like he was nobody. He was my first investor. I was 19 years old, broke, no connections, no credibility. Nobody would touch me. But he did. He co-signed my first major funding round, paid for my legal counsel, introduced me to Chairman Hayes. Everything I've built professionally traces back to him believing in me when I had nothing. Rebecca felt the ground shift beneath her. I didn't know. You didn't ask, Tyler shot back. You dismissed him in front of half the advisory council. In front of donors he personally recruited. You humiliated him at a company event with me standing right next to you, making me complicit in disrespecting the one person who gave me a real chance. His voice dropped lower, more controlled but somehow more cutting. You thought you were protecting my image. You were destroying the only professional relationship that actually mattered to me. Tyler, I was trying to help. Help? He laughed, bitter and sharp. You just burned the bridge between me and the man who built the road I'm standing on. This isn't about office politics anymore. This is about loyalty, about respect, about understanding where you actually came from. He let go of her arm, stepped back. We're done. You and me, professionally, we're done. He turned and walked away down that same hallway where the plaque hung, where my name was still etched in steel. He didn't look back. Rebecca received her formal termination papers that Friday. The company offered her a clean exit, no public scandal, no announcement to the industry, just a separation agreement with a severance package tied to a comprehensive non-disclosure agreement. She could leave with some dignity intact, or she could fight it and have everything that happened at the gala become public record in a legal battle she had no resources to win. She signed the papers that afternoon. I didn't see Rebecca again until about a month later. We met at a coffee shop to finalize our divorce paperwork. Yeah, that was happening too. Some betrayals you don't come back from, and this was one of them. She looked different when she walked in. The confidence that used to define her was just gone. She sat down across from me and stared at her coffee cup for a long time before speaking. I didn't know, she finally said, about the provision, about your authority, about Tyler, about any of it. I genuinely didn't know. You never asked, I replied. Not cruel, just honest. You saw me step back from daily operations and assumed that meant I was out completely. You rewrote our entire history to fit a narrative where you were the only one building something. I wanted to be my own person, she said, and there was real pain in her voice. Not just your wife, not just someone who got where she was because of who she married. Becca, you always were your own person. I never tried to stop you from building your own career, but you decided you had to erase me to elevate yourself. That was your choice, not mine. She didn't have an answer. We signed the divorce papers. The whole thing was finalized 6 weeks later. Rebecca works for a smaller consulting firm now, different industry, fresh start. I heard through mutual acquaintances that she's doing okay. We don't communicate. There's nothing left to say. As for me, I'm still involved with the company, though in a lighter capacity. Mostly advisory work, strategic planning, mentoring younger executives who actually wanted to learn from people who came before them. My name is still on that founding plaque in the executive hallway. The one Rebecca walked past every single day for years without really seeing it, without understanding what it meant. People ask me sometimes if I regret what happened, if I think invoking Provision 7D was too harsh, if I should have just let it go. But here's what they don't understand. I didn't create those consequences. The provision existed to protect people like me from exactly what she did. All I did was enforce boundaries that should never have needed enforcement. If Rebecca had treated me with even basic respect that night, none of this would have happened. She made a choice at that gala. She chose to publicly humiliate someone she assumed had no power to respond. She chose wrong. Sometimes the quietest people in the room are the ones who built it. Sometimes the people who forget that learn very expensive lessons about the difference between stepping back and stepping away. I stepped back from daily operations, but I never stepped away from my authority, my protections, my legacy. And when Rebecca pushed me toward that service exit, treating me like I was invisible, like I was nothing, she triggered the very safeguards I'd embedded years ago to prevent exactly that scenario. The irony isn't lost on me. She wanted me gone so badly that she never stopped to consider whether I'd already anticipated that possibility. And after all, I'd spent 15 years in corporate strategy. You don't reach that level without learning to protect yourself from every conceivable angle, including betrayal from the people closest to you. I'm not the villain here, despite what some people might think. I'm just someone who refused to be erased, and in a world where people constantly try to rewrite history to make themselves look better, sometimes refusing to disappear is the most powerful thing you can do. Rebecca learned that lesson the hard way, standing in an expensive ballroom under fake crystal chandeliers, making a choice that cost her everything she thought she'd built. Because what she built wasn't hers alone. It was built on a foundation I'd laid, with protections I'd embedded, under rules I'd written. And when she tried to take sole credit, when she tried to delete me from the story, the legal structure did exactly what it was designed to do. It protected the truth. You can dismiss the truth, try to bury it in a side hallway, pretend it doesn't exist. But it doesn't disappear. It waits. And sometimes it comes back with signatures, timestamps, and legal provisions that nobody remembered to read until it was too late. I'm at peace with how everything ended. Not happy exactly, but at peace. I know who I am, I know what I built, and I know that the best response to being written out of your own story is simply refusing to let someone else hold the pen. Rebecca tried to make me disappear. Instead, she erased herself. And all I had to do was remind everyone of what was already true, already documented, already signed and notarized years before she decided I was disposable. The foundation remembers, even when everyone else forgets. And sometimes that's all the revenge you need.